Thanks for everyone that's joined us. We are going to wait until 6 o'clock, so a couple of minutes to go before we get started, but we will get started briefly. Hi, everyone. I see that it's 6 o'clock, so I would like to get things started. And for whatever reason, whenever I share my screen, I lose my view of all of you. I stopped sharing screen for the time being so we could get things started. And then once I start sharing my screen, uh, we'll we'll get into the presentation. We will take breaks during the presentation for any questions or comments from those attending, and I'll explain to you as we get going how we'll do that. And I am joined by Nicole McCallum, who's working behind the scenes running our Zoom webinar. And so she will be also fielding, helping to manage any comments or questions and making sure people have the ability to speak up. I will ask that you use the raised hand feature to ask any questions or comments. And we will be sure to get to anyone that does have questions or comments. And you can also use the Q&A function if you feel more comfortable typing in questions and answers. I do have a presentation to get us started. That'll take about 20 minutes. And then as we get on to the zoning recommendations, we'll stop at following each recommendation to open it up to any questions or answers. So with that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Charles Sheehan, your chair of planning and zoning, to make any introductions that he sees fit to start this meeting. And Chuck? Chuck, you're muted if you're interested in getting us started with any introduction. Please go ahead and unmute. And Clifton, can you hear me okay?
I can, Francisco. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Clifton, looks like Chuck might have a tech issue. Either that or you had to briefly step away. Clifton, anything you would like to say to get us
I'm
started?
sorry. I'm here now, and I don't
Okay.
want to walk over. I was having a
Yeah.
very difficult time unmuting, but seems
Okay.
to be working again. Thank you. Appreciate everybody's attending this evening. I cannot see on my screen who we have from the public. I can see a few of our commissioners that have joined. And thank you, Francesco, for all the work in setting up this presentation tonight. We will depart a little bit from the normal decorum at these meetings and talk a little bit about process. We've come a long way since we've started these discussions. We had a fairly lengthy discussion about process when we started, and we haven't reviewed it since. So I'm looking not only for comment this evening, and the board is looking for not only comment this evening on the content of the residential recommendations, but also on the process and how we might improve outreach and the way we've done it so far. So it seems to have worked so far, and it's our plan to move forward, but it's not a rigid plan, and we can change things if there are constructive suggestions. So with that in mind, I turn it back to you, Francesco, and Clifton. I apologize for treading on your speech there in the beginning.
Thank you, Chuck. And Clifton, anything you care to add to that before I get going?
No, I want to thank you, Francisco, and your team for putting this on, everyone from the commission, and then obviously all the attendees that we have with us tonight. I would say that, I've spoken to many community members over the past couple of weeks specifically, and some of them were unable to make it tonight, but just for those that are participating, thank you. And if you know somebody that wasn't able to make it on tonight's call and they have further questions or want updates about this process, feel free to contact me at their convenience. And that's about it. I'll let you go with it, Francisco.
Okay, thank you very much. And this meeting is being recorded, and we post recordings of all of our meetings to the town's website. So if someone misses it, be sure to let them know they can watch a video of the meeting. Okay, so I will share my screen again, and let's see, I've got multiple screens to choose from. Which one to choose from? All right, can everyone see the first page of the presentation okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, thank you. So welcome to our meeting. This is the second public meeting, second public presentation of recommended amendments that we've conducted. The prior one we conducted was about 3 months ago, and it was on the topic of environment, resilience, and sustainability. And so here this evening, we are here to talk about our recommended residential zoning district amendments. And so our agenda is we'll provide you with a brief introduction as to what we're doing and the purpose of the update and the purpose of this meeting. Then we'll get into the update process that we've been following. To Chuck's point, we'll spend some time talking about the process, and we're very receptive to ideas on how we can improve the process. We'll talk about the April workshop that we conducted and some of the feedback we received at that workshop. We'll get into the online survey results that we've had to date and the responses we've had to date with respect to residential districts. So I'll just give you a sample of some of that input. It is a comprehensive survey that asks many questions about many different aspects of the zoning, and it is still open. So I'll give a plug for that as we get into the presentation. And then we'll get into the heart of the meeting, which is the recommended amendments that we've developed over the past 3 to 4 months, and that we want to introduce to the public for consideration of moving forward. And then we'll talk about what's involved in terms of our next steps. So first of all, this project is being led by the Planning Department and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Clifton representing the Planning Department, and our entire commission's been engaged with with Chuck as the chair being particularly involved, and Ben Philprick, our former chair, very involved. And so I want to thank both of them and the entire commission. FHI Studio, and to introduce myself again, Francisco Gomes with FHI Studio. I'm the project manager. FHI Studio was hired by the town about 1.5 years ago, and we've been at work since on updating the zoning regulations. I'll explain to you the work that we've done to date. But we are a planning firm. We're based out of Hartford. We have an office in New York. And we do work throughout Connecticut and the Northeast on comprehensive planning, affordable housing plans, zoning work, transportation work, and a range of work with communities. So this type of work is very familiar to us, and that being said, it's different in every community in which we work. And Stonington is a very unique community in many ways. And so the work that we do is really tailored to meet the needs of this community. As I mentioned before, all recordings of all of our meetings are available online, and we've been conducting monthly virtual meetings with the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is really acting as our steering committee for this project. And those have been ongoing for, did I say it was 1.5 years to 2 years now that time goes by. All those meetings are open to the public, and we make meeting summaries available in addition to those recordings on the town's website. So the purpose of our meeting this evening is to review the recommendations for zoning amendments to improve the town's residential district zoning. The Planning Commission, Zoning Commission, really invites the community to participate in this process. And we are inviting and looking forward to feedback on what has been recommended. We are not going to take any action at this meeting. This is a public meeting for the public benefit of sharing information and receiving feedback and answering questions. The recommended amendments that we have developed are intended to be carried forward into a later date for potential adoption. And that's after they've been vetted with the community, and we've gotten lots of eyes on them, and they've been well considered. And that would most likely occur in 2025. We haven't set any dates yet, but that is what we're working towards, and not in early 2025 either, because we have a lot of work in front of us. We've got several months of work in front of us remaining. So the purpose of the update, and as I mentioned, we're now 2 years into the process, is really to overhaul the zoning regulations so that they're more responsive to the conditions that we see right now in Stonington, and to get them up to speed and up to date with many changes that have happened at the state level, with changes in statute, and that have happened in the courts. So the purpose of this update is to provide more user-friendly regulations that are accessible to a wide audience, that are efficient and effective for both staff and the commission to administer, that are compliant with statute and best practices, and to ensure that we're addressing issues surrounding the environment, housing demand, development pressures, changing building practices and technologies, and changes in codes, building codes, statutes, and various state policies that affect land use and the regulation of development. The process, as I mentioned, we've been at work on this for a couple of years, and we have successfully updated the first round of revisions to the zoning regs, and those have been in place since November. So this is a two-phase process. The first phase was focused on restructuring the organization of the regulations, correcting any inconsistencies, omissions, redundancies, errors, and getting them into compliance with recent statutory changes. And we went through a lengthy process with that. It's very similar to the process we're going through in this phase. It included public presentations, public hearing, and eventually adoption without any opposition. So those have been in place now for several months, and I think have been very effective already. That's provided a solid foundation for us to build upon as we consider making additional and more substantive changes. So this is very intentionally a two-phase process, with the first phase intended to really reorganize the document and make it more capable of accommodating more change. And we've reserved this second phase for what we describe as substantive changes. These are changes that really will affect property owners, properties and their rights, what they can build, where they can build. And that requires much more community engagement than we conducted in the first phase, which is why we're before you this evening, which is why we've been conducting the workshops that we've been conducting. So with respect to phase two, we've broken it up into 5 different segments or work cycles. We've recently completed the first one of those, which is environmental resources, conservation, sustainability, and resilience. And the outcome of that was 17 specific zoning recommendations. Those are all documented and currently available on the town's website. There is a page on the town's website dedicated to this comprehensive rewrite. You can find the button for it, the tab on it, on the planning and zoning page. Or I think if you just do a Google search for Stonington Comprehensive Zoning Rewrite, it might bring you straight there. So the recommendations of both that first work segment and this current one, which is focused on housing and residential districts, are available online. And so what we'll be doing this evening is talking about the 10 recommendations specific to housing and residential districts. Our future work involves following a similar process for commercial and industrial districts, and then moving on to site design, parking, and signage, and then finally more administrative aspects of the zoning regulations, including permit requirements. And the process that we're following for each one of these unfolds on more or less a 3 to 4 month cycle. So phase one, as I mentioned, we completed that in the fall of 2023. We've been at work now on phase two for about 6 months, and that puts us right here, housing and residential districts, with work that we expect to continue into 2025 and summer 2025, or maybe late spring, as soon as late spring, when we would actually consider bringing some of these recommended amendments to a public hearing for consideration of adoption. So there's a lot of time between now and then. Each work segment, and here we're working on residential districts, as I mentioned, it has followed more or less a 4-month schedule. And that begins with research and review, researching the existing regs, best practices, what other communities are doing, the state of the art, and research into issues that the town's experienced with the regulations as they're currently written. We've then conducted a workshop, a public workshop, where we've invited the public to participate in a discussion about that topic. That's been informative to drafting of the recommended amendments. So we then drafted those, worked with the commission in multiple meetings to refine those. And then finally, at the end of that 4 months, bringing them to you. And here we are this evening at a public presentation of those recommended amendments. There are multiple opportunities for residents and other stakeholders to participate in this process, as I've mentioned. But I think this is a very important point to make, is that it's our intention for this process to be as transparent and as welcoming as possible. First of all, our regular meetings, our monthly meetings, our special meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission, they are open to the public. And those links, the meeting agenda and links, are posted every month on the town's website. Our zoning workshops, we encourage participation. The more, the better. And we plan on conducting 3 additional workshops. We've conducted 2 to date. We will also be conducting future virtual presentations, just like the one that we're conducting this evening. At least 3 more of those. Your town planner, Clifton, who's on the meeting this evening, is very welcoming and receptive to any feedback or input, whether it be handwritten or an email, or to come in and talk to him. And he has forwarded everything that he's received straight to us, and we've discussed the feedback received at commission meetings. And then finally, what we're working towards is a public hearing for adoption in 2025, and we invite the public to participate in that process as well. As I mentioned, we've been conducting workshops in support of this effort, and our most recent one was conducted in April. And at the workshop, the workshop's been a combination of presentation, where we give a presentation not dissimilar to the presentation I'm giving this evening, to provide a basic introduction. But we very quickly move past that and get into engagement with attendees. For example, we use a interactive real-time survey mechanism or feature where the attendees can vote on questions. And so we're able to receive feedback. And by example, I just sampled a few of the questions for you that we asked at our most recent workshop. So we asked about the existing zoning regulations. How well do they regulate development in the town's residential zoning districts, or do they do an adequate job? And the response that we received to that, and pardon me, it just takes a minute to load, is about half of people felt like there was some sort of deficit with respect to the zoning regulations and residential districts. So we know there's work to be done. And the real question is, what does that mean? Or what is the work to be done? So that's what we followed up on in the workshop is, okay, what are the needs? Why isn't work? Why do you think it's not working as well as it should? We asked, does Stonington need more housing? And more than half of people told us yes. So we also know there are a lot of divergent views on what type of housing and where that housing should be located. And we did use the workshop to dive into those issues. We also asked, does Stonington need to allow for a greater diversity of housing types? So it's not just about quantity, but what type of housing. And what we heard from that was a little more than half said yes. So roughly about the same amount of people that said you need more housing. We think are more or less the same people that thought it also needs to be more diverse or a greater selection. We asked about age-restricted housing or senior or assisted living facilities. And about half of respondents think that the town needs more of that type of housing. And what we see in Connecticut is, in many Connecticut communities, you have a proportionately growing senior population. It's bigger in many cases than your population of children. And so we know you have some special housing needs with respect to the baby boom generation that's aging and wants to remain in Stonington, but may not be able to stay in their homes. So it's important to address the housing needs of those residents. Then we asked about housing density, and should higher density housing be permitted in the village districts and other areas that are highly developed? And here we saw the community, or the attendees at least, very split on this issue, with no being a little more than, or close to half, but more than the yes responses. So I'll get into that in a moment. I'll show you a map of how that plays out. And then we asked, should the development of housing in coastal areas be more restricted? And here we had a lot more agreement, with nearly 3/4 of people saying yes. We also asked about accessory dwelling units. The town does allow accessory dwelling units. And so we asked, should the town allow more accessory dwelling units? And our response to that was more than half of people said yes. Okay. I do see we have a hand raised. I want to get through this first, then I'll take a break, and then we'll answer or receive any questions you might have. We also asked, should more housing be built as as in the form of mixed-use developments. So that would be a mix of residential and commercial. And evenly split on this. Right. So for many of these questions or issues, we don't have overwhelmingly clear direction as to absolutely yes or absolutely no. These are very nuanced issues, and they've required a lot of discussion on the part of our team and the commission to get at the heart of these issues. And even within the workshop, we spent a lot of time discussing with participants, you know, what do you mean when you say yes or no? What does that mean and why? We also asked, should the town allow more multifamily residential to be built in more places? And once again, very evenly split here, with no being more than yes. I think a more telling or engaging part of the survey was a visual preference survey we conducted. So we showed participants over 30 images of housing in various forms. And we asked them, just give us your first impression as to how much you like it or don't like it on a scale of 1 to 5. And of all those images we showed them, these 6 were the highest ranked. And so we have different types of housing here, but these were the most positively responded to. And I think in these images, you likely see housing that you might recognize as being in or could be in Stonington, and maybe other forms of housing that aren't typical of Stonington, but may be appropriate, versus the least preferred images, which I think the clear pattern here is the larger scale, bigger footprint, big building type residential was really found to be undesirable. So that's something we kept in mind as we considered various amendments to the residential zoning regs. So as I mentioned, we followed that up with some breakout sessions where we got into discussions and we asked pointed questions such as, what is your vision for Stonington's residential area, and what type of housing does Stonington need more of? And this is a sample. I mean, we had over 100 plus responses to this that we recorded, and all of that is in the workshop summary that we provided, which is available online. We heard everything from, yeah, population growth is good, so we should have housing to support that, but it needs to be sustainable. And we need more elderly housing for 55 plus. There was a lot of debate on whether the town needs more single family housing or if it has enough. There's general consensus that people who grow up in Stonington, who work in Stonington, there should be a place for them in Stonington. There should be a housing opportunity. And then there was also a thought the town just needs more different types of housing in the form of 2-family homes or condos or townhouses, particularly for seniors with mobility limitations. And then just blanket statements like there's just more housing needed across town. Affordable housing is a priority, more multifamily homes. And it's important to maintain the character and appearance of housing in town so that you stay with something that looks like it belongs in Stonington, New England character. We also asked about where, so that was kind of the what question. And we had a mapping exercise. We asked people to pinpoint on the map, okay, where, what place in town could accommodate more housing? And I think here people were generally in agreement that housing or more housing should go where you have infrastructure and capacity to absorb it. And that is where you have sewer and water, where you have arterial roads near highways, away from environmentally sensitive areas like the shore and other coastal areas. And so near exit 90. And in these development areas where you already have development, there's the infrastructure that can accommodate it. And there are ideas that type of development should be clustered and open space protected, and development should be placed along corridors where you already have development. It could or should be intensified in those areas and maybe in some of the village areas as well. So when we mapped it out, and this was really a compilation of a lot of tabletop maps that were marked up with markers and pretty messy. When we mapped out all the areas where people told us, yeah, maybe these areas are appropriate for more residential development. It was in your villages, it was near your highway interchanges and along major corridors like Route 1. Okay, we do have a couple of questions, so I'd like to pause now before I get into the survey, and happy to receive those. And Nicole, whoever had their hand raised, can you enable them to speak up?
Go ahead, Jen.
Hi there, Jen Daly McFadden. I'm the president of Lords Point Association. Thanks for doing this and taking some questions. You've answered my first one. This is the survey that's still open. I'm just curious, as far as the feedback you've gotten so far, what's the number of respondents?
We are at a few hundred. I did not check today, but
Okay.
we're at a few hundred, and I tell you, we'd love to get to 1,000. So we plan on keeping
Still
it
seems
open.
like a small number compared to the number of residents in town, but okay.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. I want to just explain to you how we use the survey. The survey is one of many touch points, and we very often use this type of survey in communities for various types of work. For comprehensive plans that we do, for area plans, town and village center plans, transportation plans. And generally speaking, we're in any of these surveys, regardless of how well they are promoted, we are getting a very, very small sample size of the community. So we're careful not to draw too many conclusions from the survey alone. It's just one additional mechanism for us to receive feedback, and it is helpful. And I can tell you that we typically do in any given survey, and these surveys have many open-ended questions where people can really provide more lengthy responses to questions, that we do typically hear from a broad diversity of viewpoints. And to date, we certainly have in some of the feedback that we've received. So this survey we're not thinking of this as a scientifically valid survey. We're not calculating to get a true representative cross-section of the town. We do want to invite the greatest potential participation as possible. And we do have several questions that ask people about how long they've lived in town, do they live in town or just work in town? So we collect some basic information to get a sense as to who we've heard from.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And just one more question. What was the mechanism for getting word out there about the survey?
Yes, it's gone out on, well, there's a link on the town's website. It's gone out on social media as well. There have been flyers posted. And so
I'm pretty active and I haven't seen any of those, just to be totally honest. And I don't know that anyone in the Lords Point community, I don't want to speak for every individual, but it's sort of news to us. So considering that some of the things that are being presented directly impact Lords Point,
sure.
I obviously will get word out about this, but
a
better communication in that sense would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And do we have another question or comment? I see we have 5 hands raised now.
Go ahead, John.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, go ahead, John. We can hear you.
Yeah, we just want to reiterate everything that nobody knew anything. There's been no outreach to our community, to our neighborhood. Everybody was completely taken aback that this was even under consideration. And so the transparency is not where it needs to be. I mean, if there have been surveys, to whom? You have respondents, but who did you ask?
Is there anything else? I'll respond if I can. I'm not sure I'll satisfy your questions, but it looks like that's your main question is how, how are we getting word out? And clearly we have not successfully or adequately reached enough residents. So who do we ask? We're asking the entire public to participate in this process. It's not exclusive to any particular area of town or to any residents. It's the town has been our partner in promoting this. My team is focused on, and I'll just need you to mute again, Nicole. Thanks. My team has been focused on really the workshops, these presentations, the surveys, and creating opportunities to participate. And maybe we need to figure out how we can do a better job of getting the information out there so that people do in fact participate. But it's certainly our intention for this process to be open to the public and for the public to be very much aware of it. So I appreciate your comment. You make it clear that there's more work that we need to do in that area. So thank you. All right, Nicole, can we go on to the next question?
David Klein, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, and I'm a little upset that I don't hear any discussion of short-term rentals. That was a really big concern for a lot of us at the workshop. We wanted to see something included here that would, zone them in specific areas and then regulate or eliminate them altogether,
Yeah.
And so that's all
Okay.
I say about that.
All right. Thank you, David. And so let me, and I don't know if this reassures you at all, but let me reassure you that you've been heard on this issue, and we know it's a very important issue. The town has received guidance from its council, from its corporation council, that the issue of short-term rentals should be or would be better addressed through ordinance. All right, so that means not through the Planning and Zoning Commission, not through zoning regulation, but through municipal ordinance and through council. So which is why we have not directly addressed that issue. Now, with that being said, in addition to drafting recommended zoning amendments, in the course of this work, we are accumulating more broad and general recommendations that we intend to document into a final report for areas that require attention that go beyond the scope of what we can do within the zoning regulations. And that right there would be on the top of the list. We've been careful in the amendments that we have made and cautious not to do anything that would exacerbate that issue. And you might argue with me that our recommendations for ADUs could do exactly that. So this issue has not gone unnoticed or ignored. It's just we've made a decision early on. It should be handled as a matter of municipal ordinance. And that came based upon the advice of council.
Okay.
And I realize that might not be entirely satisfying to you, but I hope that provides an explanation.
It does, thanks. I'm hopeful that, the ordinance process will work. I'm not sure.
All right, can we go to the next hand that's raised?
Okay, Blunt White.
Can you hear me? It's Blunt White,
Yes,
77
we can.
Collins Road.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay. So how does this fit in with the POCD, the Plan of Conservation and Development? 10 years ago, we did it, and we had an extensive questionnaire with over 700 responses. And there's been as far as I can tell, no POCD work done so far this year, and it's due this year or next year. And what's it seems like you're doing all of the work that would be associated normally with the POCD in terms of looking at regulations and
Yeah.
and things. And so where have you been meeting with the POCD committee? Are there minutes for those meetings, or what's been happening?
So that is a fantastic question, and thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to defer to Clifton on some of this, but I can tell you that much of the work we're doing, it was directed by your existing POCD, the 2015 POCD. It guides much of what we're doing, and there are very specific recommendations, and I actually referenced one of them in a few slides that guide us in our work. So this process is an outcome of that POCD. It may have been that it took 7 or 8 years for us to get started on it, but it's a direct outcome of that POCD. Now, as you correctly point out, the next POCD is due next year, I believe. And the town is starting on that process. So I think the work that we're doing can be complementary to it. Would in the ideal world would it have been better to have done the POCD 2 or 3 years ago, and for us to be doing the zoning now so that they were better correlated? Perhaps, but I think many of the same issues that were at the forefront in the last POCD are continue to be relevant now, and so we do have a solid foundation to build upon, even if it was work that was done 9 or so years ago. And Clifton, is there anything you want to add about the POCD update and where that stands and the process that you'll be taking?
Absolutely. Just to echo again everything Francisco said, the POCD will run concurrently or in tandem, and with this process, we finally have completed all of the funding requests through the Board of Finance for the previous fiscal years, and we should be getting an RFP out for the POCD sometime this summer. So as long as we get that process started this year, we can probably have both projects overlay each other and influence each other moving forward.
Thank you, Clifton.
Can I add another question to that?
Sure.
So the timeline you were projecting, it showed adoption for your recommendations in mid 2025, and wouldn't we want to have the POCD done before we were talking about going to public hearing with all of these recommendations?
Not necessarily. Once again, in the ideal world, the POCD, we'd be following the POCD maybe by a couple of years, but I think we'll be far enough at that point. We'll have launched the POCD process and been able to really engage people in a discussion about land use and zoning. And there are many aspects of the POCD, land use and zoning being one of them. And perhaps that work could be advanced or a little earlier in the process so that the POCD planning process can really get people thinking about zoning as well, and it can inform the zoning work. But I think everything we're doing is largely consistent with your existing POCD, and I'd be very surprised if an update of that POCD took the town in a very different direction with respect to land use and zoning.
I'd concur with that, Francisco. A lot of the questions that we've been asking through the comprehensive zoning rewrite are very similar, if not the same questions that would come up through the POCD. So we would expect similar answers, which is why this process can continue to run in tandem with each other. I don't see one negating or pulling a 180 on the other, moving forward.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, one more, and I want to make sure we have time to get through the rest of the meeting.
Okay, well, we're talking about the questionnaire, and
Yeah.
green space seemed to be very high in the, well, that was the highest rated item in the 2015 POCD questionnaire. and the affordable housing was the lowest rated item in the POCD questionnaire. And you're proposing to increase densities substantially, housing densities substantially, and that it seems to be counter to what the questionnaire indicated.
Yeah, I would disagree that we're proposing to increase density substantially. I think it's a real broad brush, and I would say strategically. And additionally, as I mentioned, we spent 4 months working on strengthening the town's environmental sustainability, resilience, and conservation regulations, or zoning regulations related to those issues. And we have 17 fairly robust recommendations to support those efforts, whereas we're talking about 10 for zoning. And we started with that because we think that it is the most important issue. Okay, I think we need to go on to a couple more questions, and then I need to continue this presentation. We'll have additional opportunities to ask questions, provide comments. Anyone else?
John O'Donnell?
The question would be how specifically for Tipping Rock Road was the wetland considered?
That's an incredibly specific question. I can't provide you an answer to that now. What I would ask you to do is submit your question to Clifton, and then we can respond accordingly. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be able to get into like very site specific conversations this evening. Okay, I'm going to continue, and you will have additional opportunities to ask questions. So once again, promoting the online survey, as I mentioned, we've had we pulled down this data about a month ago, so we've had a lot more participation since. And some of the folks that we've heard from have, when we ask them what type of housing Stonington need more of, it's really across the board. Actually, single family homes was the most popular response. But people also told us accessory dwelling units, mixed use, 2, 3, 4 family, townhouses, senior housing, assisted living, and apartments and buildings or large developments. And that was the least preferred. So we have a diversity of viewpoints on that. And I just have a couple other responses to sample. We asked, what are your thoughts on the residential zoning regulations? And not too many people, the small percentage of people thought they were generally too restrictive, or on the contrary, not restrictive enough. It was more about too restrictive in some areas or for some uses, and not restrictive in a lot in other areas. So we're dealing with, really, this question really depends upon where in town we're talking about. And then we also asked about ADUs and whether the regulations should be more supportive of ADUs. And people are generally said yes, they should be more supportive. But I can tell you, and to the question or the point that was raised earlier, the concerns about ADU that David had, we heard many comments that, yeah, I'm more supportive of these provided they aren't used for short-term rentals. Okay, so I once again, I talked a little bit about this, but I just want to make sure you understand our purpose in updating the residential zoning regulations. And first of all, in the engagement we've conducted so far on this issue, we've had a lot of support from those participating in us taking a look at this and updating the zoning regulations to create more opportunities for housing. Additionally, there are hundreds of residential properties across the town that are currently non-conforming with the standards of the zoning district in which they are located. And that's mostly due to standards such as lot size, that's the big one, but also setbacks, frontage, and various other standards. And what that means by non-conforming was In most cases, the housing was built before the current regulations were adopted, or at least before they were amended to the standards that they currently have. And they were instantly made non-conforming, which means that whenever someone wants to improve their property, anything that requires a zoning permit or special permit, they either can't, or they have to go to the zoning board of appeals for a variance to do so. And generally speaking, going to ZBA for variances for things like non-conforming the lot size and setbacks is a bad practice. That should be that sort of variance should be reserved for extreme hardship conditions, for aspects that are really unique to the property or to the land. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, both the town's Plan of Conservation and Development, the current one, and the Affordable Housing Plan recommend that the town work on its zoning regulations, and specifically its residential zoning district regulations. And this quote comes straight from your POCD. This is one of the many recommendations. It says, conduct a comprehensive rewrite of the zoning regulations to revisit, update, and modernize residential zoning and streamline the planning process. And so we're engaging in exactly that. So what I'm going to present this evening are the recommended zoning amendments that we've prepared. And these are the recommendations that, if they have the support of the community and barring any strong opposition, we will carry forward at some point to a public hearing for adoption. And we have 10 recommendations. They start at recommendation number 18, because we've developed 17 recommendations to date, and those 17 recommendations are relevant to environmental protection, resiliency, sustainability, and conservation. These recommendations range from minor in that it's really a change of one word in the zoning regs, or the impact would be anticipated to be minor, if not negligible, to comprehensive, meaning it would apply throughout many zoning districts, or it would affect many aspects of the zoning regs, or it would affect a lot of property owners. So we have a range of recommendations here. They build upon the work that we've done on resiliency and sustainability and are consistent with that work. And this document and these recommendations are currently available on the comprehensive rewrite page of the town's website. So I will go through these one by one, and they range from rezoning of areas to reduce lot size nonconformity, all the way to changing the look-back period of your flood hazard regulations. Okay, we'll go through them one by one. I'll go through each one, I'll stop, and then receive any questions or comments that you have. All right, so recommendation 18 is to rezone areas to reduce lot size nonconformity. So we did quite a bit of mapping using available GIS data and parcel data, and we found that there are hundreds of residential properties that are non-conforming with lot size of the district in which they are located. And this was across all residential zoning districts and across all the town, although this tended to be clustered in areas. So what we've recommended is to rezone those areas to another existing zoning district that is more commensurate with the lot sizes that are found in those areas. And this was a very precise approach we took. We really followed parcel lines to capture areas that were largely non-conforming. In total, what we're recommending, what's been proposed, is rezoning of 426 acres, which is 1.5% of Stonington's land area. And we don't anticipate adverse impacts because most of these areas are already built out with residential. it's really about bringing the existing properties into conformity. And it may be that there are vacant properties right now that are not buildable because they don't have adequate lot size that will be brought into conformity and will become buildable. But for the most part, we're talking about existing residences. And I'll walk you through that on a map. In total, we have 7 different areas, and some of which contain 100+ lots, and others that have a dozen. So starting in Pawcatuck up here in this first area, we have 78 acres comprised of 129 lots, and all 129 of those lots are smaller than the minimum lot size for the RR80. And for those of you that aren't terribly familiar with your zoning regs or how they work, 80 means 80,000 square foot minimum, which is just shy of 2 acres. And so if you're in that district, if you have a lot or a property that is less than 80,000 square feet in area, and your property is non-conforming, and when you want to build a garage or anything else, you need to go to ZBA to get a variance to allow you to do so. And that's if it is granted. Now, what we find is that in this area, as I mentioned, 100% of the lots are non-conforming, and they're tiny lots. They're 10 to 15,000 square foot lots. So it would make more sense for this area to be zoned just like the area north of it, which is RM15. And we've been very careful to recommend changes from one district to another district that allows exactly or almost exactly the same types of uses. So we're not talking about changing the uses allowed. We're just talking about changing the lot standards. Otherwise, the same uses. So by example, your RA districts, you have an RA20 and an RA15. They are virtually exactly the same district, and they are exactly the same district with respect to uses, and almost the same in all other aspects, except for slightly different lot size standards. RA20 being 20,000 square feet versus 15. So wherever we've recommended a change to an RA20 or an RC120, it's staying within that same type of district. Versus an RM district, which is generally more permissive of different types of uses. So we've avoided recommending a change from an RA to an RM. So in summary, we have areas that range from 78 acres to down to 17, where we have in all of these areas, 100% of the lots are non-conforming with lot size. And by shifting them over into a different district, and most of these districts are surrounding them already, we would bring most, and in some cases, all of those lots into conformity. And I've got a couple more slides to this effect, and then I'll pause. When we go to the west side of town for those 3 other areas, we see immediately north of the borough, in area 6, we have 20 acres there. 63 of the 66 lots do not meet the lot size requirement for the RM20. So moving that down to RH10 would bring most of those properties into conformity. To the northeast of that, we have an RR80, which is really almost identical to the RA40, and the use is allowed, just half the lot size. And by changing that, we would bring 196 acres, 24 of 59 lots into conformity. And then finally, number 7, area 7 over here. We have 66 acres, 281 of the 291 lots that are undersized. And changing that from RM20 to RH10 would bring most of those into conformity. So when we take a look at, I'm sorry, there's also one other area. This came to us by a resident. And we found that the zoning map and the district boundaries also have allowed for some of these anomalies. There were 3 parcels developed as part of the rest of this development, which is RH10, that for whatever reason were zoned GB130. And GB130 is almost 3 acres, or almost exactly 3 acres. And here you have 1/4 acre lots that found themselves into a 3 acre minimum district. So this is a pretty straightforward amendment to change the map to put these 3 tiny properties where they belong into the RH10. So with that being said, I'm happy to receive any questions.
Mike Firebach.
Okay, just confirm you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Yep, thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
Yeah, first wanted to thank you and Clifton and the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission for taking the time to work through this. Someone who has served and continues to serve on boards in town, I know this sometimes can be thankless work, so do appreciate that. Having said that, just wanted to try to get a little bit more clarity on one of the proposals. So the 196 acres north of Stonington Borough, which you've got labeled there as number 5. You've indicated that 25 of those 59 lots are non-conforming to lot size. But having looked at the GIS for the town and the size of each of those lots, it looks like every single one of those lots that are non-conforming are along Route 1A, Stanton Road, or Cemetery Road. And every lot on Tipping Rock Road is in compliance with lot size. So it seems to me like one possible solution going forward here would be to actually split that zone. And as you indicated a moment ago, Francisco, you noted that you guys were very precise here. You followed the parcel lines. If you in fact do that here, the solution would seem to be to to exclude Tipping Rock Road from that because there's not a single property that's non-conforming. So I'm wondering how Tipping Rock Road got lumped in there.
Yeah, we were at the same time trying to follow some fairly natural boundaries within these zoning districts. And here, Stonington Road provided a fairly natural boundary to that. And that being said, Tipping Rock Road, yeah, you're correct. I think this is the one area where we saw that there wasn't an overwhelming majority of the parcels. It was fairly split though with some parcels on the other side. But we take a closer look at this. That's what this process is for, and we're very receptive to being a little more precise with this area in particular.
Hardin Gray.
Hi, this is Hardin Gray. I'm the president of the Tipping Rock Association. I'd like to echo Mike's thanks for all that you've been doing so far. One question I have just related to this process in general, is there a concern as you are reducing the lot size for areas, Pawcatuck and everywhere else, is there a concern that an existing property could be purchased by a developer and then subdivided into the new zoning, and so eventually changing the character and nature of the neighborhoods?
That's a great question. One of the reasons that we've been very targeted in our efforts is to try to only capture areas that have currently undersized lots. And for the most part, the changes that we're proposing just barely bring those into conformity, and not in 100%. Even with some of the changes proposed, there still be a percentage of lots that are still non-conforming. So I don't think we're going to create many, if at all, if any, opportunities to subdivide lots. There may be 1 or 2 here or there that prove to be the exception to that. But by and large, I really don't think this is going to open the door up to subdivisions of lots and tremendous amount of, or any infill type development. I do think for vacant lots that are currently non-conforming, it certainly will, change things for that. If anyone has a house and they own the lot next to them and it's really treated as part of their property and it's currently vacant, and now it becomes conforming as a lot in and of itself, then it certainly presents an opportunity for building a home. But it wouldn't be anything that comes close to changing the character or the overall density of these neighborhoods. It's really about allowing what's already there.
All right, thank you.
Sure, that's a great question.
Blunt White,
Blunt, if not, we'll move on to the next person.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Yeah. So we're talking about Area 5. There are some large parcels in there. I'm looking at one that's on the GIS with
Yeah.
the 3 lots in common ownership that's is 17 acres.
Mhm.
And that could certainly be subdivided. And there's a lot
Oh,
on
absolutely. Yeah,
there's a
very
lot
much
on
so.
North Main that's 11 and a
agree.
half acres that, you know, if the congregate care facility drops to 5 acres, that could become another Stone Ridge or Masonic Care.
Mhm.
So you know, I just want to bring that point up, but the point I wanted to make was about Area 6, which it's 20 acres of north of Stonington Borough,
Yes.
and it's 63 of 66 lots in this area are non-conforming with the lot size requirement changed to RH10. RH10 would be 0.23 acres. I counted up the lots there with the GIS, and
Yeah.
you know, of those 63, 50 would remain non-conforming under your proposal. 50 lots would remain non-conforming.
So that's based upon lot size alone in and of itself, and the other
Yeah,
considerations are
just as
also
to lot size.
setback and coverage, and so there are a few other factors involved.
So it's a multivariable analysis that you perform?
Yeah, well, that's a fancy way of describing it, but there are other considerations in addition to lot size, and this gets it a little closer. Admittedly, you know, that area should probably go down to a 5,000 square foot lot size because the lots are so small. But we've been reluctant to propose create brand new zoning districts that are, you know, that small. We're trying to work within the framework of your existing districts by just moving things into districts they're more closely aligned with.
That area is kind of like a spillover of the borough. I mean,
Yeah,
it's almost
it
like
is.
borough zoning should be applied there.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay, well, I'll make a note of it. I mean, we take it, there's more that we should do, or I'm not sure if you're suggesting that there's no point doing what we're doing because it wouldn't change much. Or maybe that we should be doing more.
Well, I'm just saying that if the analysis was based on lot size alone, then it doesn't solve the problem of that neighborhood because 50 of the lots still remain non-conforming.
Right.
thank you. Jen McFadden,
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. I have 2 questions or a comment and a question, I guess. You know, down here on Lord's Point, I have to push back a little bit on if some of these lots that now aren't buildable could be buildable, that could change our character. You know, we're very we're very much on top of each other here. So adding to that, I'm sure you've been here, Francisco. So you've seen that.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yep. So I think that might be, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood, might need to look at that. But I have a question, and don't quote me on the dates, but I believe in like the last week or 10 days or so, the area that you were planning to have these rezones went from like 1,500 to 400 or so. Can you just give us some insight on that?
Yeah, oh, sure. We had initially discussed a much larger area to the north of here. And can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this area up here, which is currently RR80, there are a significant number of non-conforming properties and throughout. And the real issue is they're strung along roads and they are in clusters, but they aren't well-defined areas of that zone. So when we first started this process, we were thinking big, and we we took a look at that whole area and south of 95. And we said, you know, what if that went down to RA 40 and we brought all those into conformity? This is also an area that's served for the most part, not all of it, but much of it by sewer and water. It's for the most part outside of flood hazard areas. It's away from the coast. It has good access to arterial roads and the highway. You know, is this potentially an area where we'd want to encourage some new development? And so we took a look at what would that look like if we took a look at that area. And that's, you know, that's several hundred acres there, or close to 1,000. And the issue is, as I mentioned, that while there are many properties, it's nowhere near 90 or 100% like many of these other areas. And we end up grabbing lots of properties that are in fact undeveloped and are large parcels. And it just proved to be too much and not necessarily worth impacting the entire area. It doesn't mean that there aren't little pockets of it that we shouldn't consider for moving to RA 40 to bring those pockets into conformity. But we decided to take it off the table, and that was a very recent decision at the meeting we held a couple of weeks ago. So that was the biggest piece of the puzzle here, and we took it off, which is why the numbers changed as much as they did.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure.
STUGC.
Okay, it's Stuart Cole.
Hi,
Can you hear
Stuart.
me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm chairman of the Conservation Commission. I live over on the Mystic side of Stonington. A couple of comments I wanted to make is the survey is really insufficient. It's the communication, you know, the new way of communicating doesn't work very well. We all like the internet and everything, but the fact is no one goes to the town website to get the news, you know. Let me tell you, in the 80s, when there was a lot of development, you had a notice in the paper, then you had an article on a particular development, and then every time the meeting room would be full of people. And these ways of communicating now, you're not making a dent. And I think that this is a pretty big change. I think you really should have to homeowners everywhere, you should have a registered letter go out and say, your zone may be changed. We're considering changing your zone. Because I think you're going to have a lot of blowback when people find out, well, I'm in this zone, I'm in different zone, and my neighbor now can build, 2 houses on his lot or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's my first comment. Second comment is the zoning board of appeals has not seen a great workload. Lately or in the past few years from people presenting hardships to them for, decks, garages, and so forth, or additions to their houses. So I'm not sure how this is warranted, because a lot of properties are still going to be non-conforming. So I'll leave it at that for now.
And Stuart, thanks for the comments. Can I ask you, are you basically saying it works fine? Like, why fix it?
In some areas, there obviously have been the zoning was poorly applied in the beginning, but
Right.
I'm just not sure. Yeah, I'm not really sure what this is accomplishing. Really, in some areas I can see it, but in other areas I just don't see what it's really accomplishing.
Okay. All right, and as a reminder, we're talking about 1.5% of Stonington's land area, so it's,
Yeah, but it happens to be where a lot of people live.
yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next question.
Stuart Thompson.
Hey, this is another Stuart, and I just want to say that I totally agree with the last Stuart who spoke. This does seem like a solution in search of a problem. I don't get it at all with respect to Tipping Rock specifically. Mike made a very good argument that we're all conforming, and somehow we're getting lumped in again. And with Harden's comment about changing the character of the street. I mean, every single property you could double, triple the number of houses in here. That would absolutely change the character of our street. And the comment you just seen just the beginning of blowback. We heard about this 2 days ago, and when more people find out about it, this is the leading edge of blowback. It's going to be very, very ugly.
And Stuart, could you just repeat, where do you think that some area is going to have the triple the amount of houses?
Tipping Rock Road, so Mike Fauerbach he just explained to you, our road is 100% conforming.
Yeah.
In this number 5, so there's 24 lots maybe outside of Tipping Rock. Maybe they can separately, but again, you're changing more than 50% of the homes. You're changing 25 homes to, or sorry, 30. You're changing 35 homes that are conforming, so that 24 can be brought into the umbrella. The math makes no sense, and as we're all contiguous conforming. The communication has been non-existent, in my opinion. We heard about this 2 days ago, kind of on the slide. To say that you've done any kind of accurate survey is absolutely absurd. We will certainly do a survey now, but this is garbage, freaking garbage, and everyone has been too polite.
All right, Stuart, you're breaking up, but I think we understand your concern. So what I agreed to earlier, and what we will do is we'll take a look at Tipping Rock Road, and based upon the comments we've received, we'll carve out that area, and we'll take a closer look at this area. We're not close to bringing any of this to a public hearing for adoption. We're very early in the process. Thank you, Stuart. We understand. Thank you.
John O'Donnell.
Let's move on to the next. I think we've heard, and let's make sure we have other people that have had an opportunity to hear from, in case we have had folks that have had plenty of opportunities to speak.
Yep, that is our list right now.
Okay, well, let's move forward, because we do have 9 more of these, and I want to make sure they receive all the attention they deserve, as do you, I'm sure. All right, recommendation 9 is to adjust frontage and setback standards, and this is consistent with everything we just discussed. It's about bringing properties into conformity. So you have frontage and setback standards. The frontage is the width of the lot required where it meets the road. The setback is how far a building or structure has to be from the property line. You have side and rear setbacks. what we found is that there's, much like the lot size, there's a lot of nonconformity throughout the town with respect to these standards. So we did an analysis. We sampled various lots across the districts. We took a look at, like we did with lot size, the degree of conformity or nonconformity, and what some of the average or typical actual setbacks and standards were. And based upon those, we've developed recommended standards that, for the most part, would reduce the existing standards. So reducing the minimum lot frontage, in this particular example, anywhere from 8% in the RA 40 to 40% in the GB 130. So those numbers change from, for example, in the GB 130 to 350 feet, which is really it's a huge distance for a residential property, down to 210, which is more consistent with what we actually saw when we measured a lot of those frontages, and down to more minor changes, although proportionally a little more equivalent in the RH10, where we have a 70-foot frontage, and bringing that down to 60 would reduce a lot of nonconformities. And I'll go through these. I've got a few of these on setbacks as well, so we'll get through all of them, and then I'll pause again. The front yard is the setback of the principal structure from the front property line where it meets the road. And we've proposed reductions of anywhere from 20% to 50%. And with distances varying from a reduction of 25 feet in the GB 130 and RC 120 to 10 feet in the RH 10. And once again, that is based upon what is actually out there, and bringing most of those properties into conformity with the regs. Likewise with side yard, we saw a lot more conformity and less of a need to adjust. The GB 130 has a minimum side yard of 30, but it requires both sides to be combined to 100, which is, if 30 feet is established as a minimum for any one side, it seems only appropriate that it be applied to both sides. So we recommend just reducing that to a flat 30 feet, which, depending on the size, either a 0 or a 40% reduction. The RC 120, similarly, it has a 75-foot side yard, and when we measured, we saw for many properties nowhere close to 75 feet. 30 feet would be more consistent with what's out there and consistent with the GB 130. Your districts in between RA 15 up to RR 80, you know, what we saw was really didn't call for any adjustments. We think those side yard setbacks are working fine. The RH 10 has a 10-foot setback right now, and there are many properties that do not meet the 10-foot setback. So we think an approach similar to what is currently required in the RA 15, which is a minimum of 5 feet on one side, provided both sides combined to 20, is more appropriate to the RH 10. And you know, here's some images. Here's Isham Street in Mystic. You know, the edge of this driveway, the edge of this property, at this fence this is the neighbor's garage, neighbor's house. So you see, you know, anywhere from what appears to be a 0 to a 3-foot setback on that side. On the other side, the fence line, clearly the property line, and there's no, you know, maybe 10 feet there. So providing some flexibility, a 5-foot setback, provided they combine to 20, would bring a property like this into conformity. And on the other side of town, we see the same thing. You see where the fence ends and the line is in the lawn. You know, there's maybe 5 feet there, certainly not 10. And on the other side, 10 at best. And so lots of examples where we don't have 10 feet in the RH 10. These are both RH 10 district properties. And then finally, the rear yard, we didn't see a need for any substantial changes there. In the RC 120, we did see the rear yard is probably the biggest issue with nonconformities, is with respect to that rear yard requirement. Reducing that to 75 feet would bring a lot of properties into conformity. And then a very minor change in the RA15, RM15 down to 30 feet from the 40, which they have a rear yard setback requirement of 40 feet, which is the same as larger districts. They are smaller districts, so there should likely be a proportional reduction. So we recommend reducing those to 30. So those, the only changes are the ones shown in red. All right. Once again, questions and comments on changing those standards and the entire purpose of that is to reflect what's actually been built.
We don't have any hands raised right now.
Okay. Yeah, this is consistent with what we just talked about. Kit, I see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, again, to the person who spoke earlier, I don't fully understand why this is necessary, other than for writing regulations, making it simpler to understand this consolidation. Yeah. And what I'm concerned about, and I've been on some of the meetings that were non-public, and I know this came up in the discussions, that people have bought their properties with the understanding that their properties would have certain setbacks from their neighbors. And by doing this potentially opens up an issue where there could be a building closer than you ever anticipated from properties that you purchased.
Yes, that is true. The changes that we're recommending are what I describe as incremental. We're not talking about reducing anything by 75 or 90%. In addition to that, they're consistent with what you see, and I'll finish and I'll open it back up to you. They're consistent with what you'd see in the neighborhoods now. So it wouldn't change the character of those neighborhoods, I don't think, because we're bringing what is already there into alignment. We're bringing the regulations into alignment with what is already commonplace in those neighborhoods. And go ahead. Yeah, Kit, if you had a follow-up question, happy to receive it or comment.
So, but yeah, I understand that you may think that it's minimum, but to someone else who's sitting on a property that enjoys a buffer, and this buffer could be significant to the homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm sort of a nerd on this stuff, so I've been to a lot of these meetings, but
Sure.
The gentleman before mentioned blowback. And I think if most people learn that their neighbor could all of a sudden potentially come a lot closer to their property, I think many people might be disturbed by that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We understand that concern. Thank you.
Mike Fauerbosch.
Yep, sorry, it took a minute to get off mute there. But yeah, no, I just want to reiterate that point. I think we just have to be very careful about saying what's commonplace or isn't. I think I know it's hard work, but I do think that the commission and the FIH studios really need to look at each of these neighborhoods very closely and understand, how many properties they're impacting, because yeah, I mean, quite frankly, it does feel like some of this hasn't been all that precise. And as I commented earlier about Tipping Rock Road, again, I'm fairly confident in what I said earlier, which is 100% of those homes are in compliance with RR80, and you're suggesting that now 100% of them be changed to RA40, and that doesn't feel like a very precise analysis from my perspective. So I think it's critical that the group that's doing this work really understand what they're proposing, and the implications for for the homeowners. And yeah, that without that precision, there is going to be a lot of negativity here, and that's obviously not what you want. And can I just reconfirm with you, Francisco, that you are going to back a look at Tipping Rock Road? I think even I got cut off at the end of my last comment there, but it sounded like you even still thought that some of them were in non-compliance. But please look at that, and if I am wrong, either you or Clifton, please get back to me. But again, I'm confident it's 100% compliance today.
Yeah, so just to settle the issue of Tipping Rock Road, first of all, I agreed that we should take a second look at that area, and I appreciate you and the other speaker bringing those concerns and information forward. I did not suggest that you're wrong or that any of those properties are not conforming. We acknowledge the fact that only about half of the properties in that area were non-conforming, slightly less than half, actually. The issue really came down to trying not to fragment areas too much. And where Tipping Rock Road was located was just surrounded by a lot of non-conforming. But to your point, there's no point in fixing what isn't broken for Tipping Rock Road. So I promise to take a second look at that, and we'll make adjustments as needed to be more sensitive to that issue. I think that's the one example, though. If you take a look at the rest of these districts, it's 90 to 100% of the properties were non-conforming.
All right, no, thank you for doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
We have one more hand. Gorello? Oh, I think they put their hand down. That is it. Oh, the hand is back. All right, Gorello?
Yes, so I'm also discussing the RH10 in our neighborhood. I understand you don't want to fragment sections of it, but when you're showing the RH10 example, our neighborhood does not look like that. And so setting us back from 10 feet to 5 feet is a major difference. And so looking at
you have to tell me which neighborhood is your neighborhood.
We are the Russell Glasgow neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
And that what you are showing as an RH10 is not even close to being what represents our neighborhood. And so that needs to be in consideration for us as well.
Okay, thank you.
That is all our hands right now.
Okay, great. Let's move forward because we do have a lot more to cover, and I want to afford you an opportunity to see all of it. All right, the next recommendation is to rename and merge residential districts. The town has 9 residential districts, and for a medium-sized town, that's a lot of different zoning districts. They're very fragmented, and many of the districts are all trying to accomplish the same thing, albeit with slightly different standards. So our recommendation is to consolidate a couple of those. And this would work in tandem with much of what we've been talking about, which is bringing more properties into conformity and adjusting some of the lot standards. Really, we don't see an opportunity to be very aggressive on this front. We think we could go from 9 to 7 districts. And this is consistent with the purpose of our update, which is really to simplify the regulations, make them easier to administer, and make them just more rational. You have a very fragmented zoning map. It has very incredibly similar districts right next to each other that are divided up into different districts with lots of nonconformity across the board. So let's take a look at what we're talking about. For most of these, it's just a matter of renaming to simplify the naming system and make it clear that We're talking about residential properties. Typically with residential zoning districts, you start with an R. That way it's instantly recognized even as a symbol on a map as residential. That's what the R stands for. So for a district like the GBR 130, it really should just be renamed to something starting with an R. So by example, RG for residential greenbelt. RC 120, it's intuitive as it stands. And dropping just some letters from some of these districts to simplify it, RA, it's not intuitive what the A is supposed to stand for. RR is rural residential. Although, just an R is sufficient to describe it as residential. So for many of these, it's about just renaming to have more consistent names and simpler terms. Your RA 20 and RA 15 districts are kind of unique in that they look a lot like the GBR 130 or RC 120 in the terms of the uses they allow. They are strictly single-family districts, very strictly, and so very different from the RM districts. And so that for that purpose, we think it would be beneficial to rename them RSF, which is residential single family. That being said, the idea here would be to converge or to consolidate the RA 20 and RA 15 and the RM 20 and RM 15 districts. And in so doing, the RA 20 would adopt any lot standards of the RA 15. And same would be true of the RM 20 and the RM 15. And that would, once again, by moving to slightly lesser standards for lot size and setback, would bring a lot of those properties into conformity. And when we take a look at on the map, and here are the RA 15, RA 20 districts. The very light green is RA 15. The darker green is RM 20. And what we can see is they're contiguous in many places. On Mystic here, we have an RA 20 entirely, or what is currently an RA 15 entirely encompassed by RA 20. Over here, Clark's Village, RA 20, RA 15 sharing many of the same boundaries, and really many of these streets indistinguishable from streets or neighborhoods in the other district. So our idea is to turn all this into one district, converge those into one. And same would be true of the RM 15, RM 20. They are very scattered through town. They're small pockets of districts. And on the island, Mesa Island, we see the RM 15, RM 20 right next to each other, but tiny little fragments of districts. So once again, we think the zoning regulations would just be more efficient, more effective if we treated all these areas as one district instead of distinct districts. With that being said, I'm happy to open up to comments and questions with respect to that.
Kit.
I'm just trying to understand when you mention maintain standards and purpose statement of RA 15 and abandon standards. What does maintain standards versus abandon standards and purpose statement?
Yeah, so in a proposal to combine RM 15, RM 20, what they essentially have the same purpose statement. They have the same purpose. So we would maintain the purpose because they have the same purpose. We would, however, apply the standards of the RM 15 would prevail. Those standards would be kept, and the RM 20 areas would assume the RM 15 standards for lot size and for setbacks, coverage, et cetera.
So the merger would only reflect the setback issue.
Lot size, setback, coverage, not use. Same use is allowed. It really the lot standards itself, a bulk area, bulk area density.
Does any of this affect the floor floor to living ratio? Restrictions?
No.
If,
So
if, your,
let
if
me,
your lot size is expanding, you've come into
yeah,
conformity,
well, let
it
me,
won't affect the FAR?
so let me talk about that. Well, I said no initially because what we've talked about, and this is going back 3 months now to one of our early recommendations, is to begin regulating lots based upon lot coverage instead of FAR. And so you'd have to visit or download our recommendations that for sustainability, resilience, and environment. And we have recommendations to move, potentially move away from FAR or maybe keep it, but to add a lot coverage limit that would restrict how much lot you could cover with buildings or pavement. And so if we adopt that, we don't necessarily need to use FAR anymore as a control on density because that's controlled by lot coverage. So getting to the bigger question that you're asking about, like density, how is this affected? An RM20 district now that would move down to an RM or get merged with an RM15 would assume whatever density is allowed in the RM15. So to your question, I think yes, in those terms, it would allow for a higher density or higher floor area ratio.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
We have no other hands at the moment.
Okay. All right, so that covers everything we just talked about. They're all interrelated, right? They're dealing with issues surrounding lot standards, density, and conformity. And I understand your concerns about all of those, and the commission is hearing your concerns, and we'll be taking all that in consideration. The rest of what we're talking about is really getting into specific uses. And so here we have accessory dwelling units. And this is a fairly minor recommendation, although I think if you have concerns about short-term rentals, maybe you don't perceive this as minor. So the town currently allows for accessory dwelling units. It allows them to be within a principal structure within a home or in a detached structure, whether it's purpose-built or converted from like a garage. However, it's a fairly high standard. You have to pull a special use permit. There's a public hearing involved. There's a lot of requirements associated with a special use permit. And your affordable housing plan had recommended allowing or enabling more accessory dwelling units. The town's experienced very little activity on this front, even though they are permitted. And this type of housing, we think, could be part of the solution for residents in Stonington, whether it is to supplement an income to help pay a mortgage or to accommodate a family member, whether it be an older parent or a young adult. And so our recommendation is very straightforward, is to reduce the permit requirement from a special use permit to a site plan application, which it still requires the production of a plan and review and adequate review, but does not require some of the other requirements, special use permit, including a public hearing. And that's the extent of that recommendation. All right, any questions or comments on this topic? Okay, I'll move forward. Recommendation 22 is to provide more flexibility in the open space development regulations to allow for greater diversity of housing type. So you have existing open space development regulations that allow for an open space subdivision to be built. And what makes that type of subdivision or development unique is that the homes are allowed to be clustered on smaller lot sizes than is otherwise allowed in the district, provided a certain percentage of that land is set aside and permanently protected as open space. So it both protects open space and reduces the cost of development because there's less roadway and infrastructure required to service the homes, which can reduce the construction cost and the purchase price of the homes and make that housing more affordable to purchase. Even though very often what we see is open space developments, they can also be higher end homes as well. You know, it can be luxury housing as well. Currently, this type of development is restricted to single family and only single family homes. And our recommendation is to allow for duplex homes or attached housing to also be built as part of an open space development. And this would be townwide within the districts where open space development is permitted. In the residential districts where permitted. In addition to that, these types of developments are also permitted in the GC 60 and MC 80. We hope that it may incentivize new development. We know that the development of single family subdivisions has really dropped off since 2008. It never really truly recovered from the housing crisis. The cost of construction is very high right now. And so there's not a lot of development in this front. This is an opportunity to encourage development in some areas, to also preserve open space in the process of doing so, and to add for a greater diversity of housing type. The restriction that we would place on this to ensure an adequate measure of control would be to only allow pre-approved housing types. And I'll show you what I mean by that on the next slide. So there are multiple programs across the country. Admittedly, we did some research, none that we could find in Connecticut. This example comes from South Bend, Indiana, that has a pre-approved housing type program. And what that means is the town basically has acquired or hired an architect to develop housing plans, a catalog of housing plans that are pre-approved, meaning you come in, you pick one of the housing types, and if you can build that housing type on a lot that conforms in particular zones, then you have your fast track with your approval process, right? You get your building permit right away. Our idea isn't quite as robust as that as of yet, although we're discussing what more we could do with it. Our idea is to let's open up certain types of development and forms of housing, provided they comply with or are a pre-approved housing type. So this would enable the town to identify and select the type of housing, style, construction of housing that is acceptable for use in an open space subdivision, and only that type of housing, that style, that quality of housing could be built. And this really is a direct response to the feedback we received at the workshop, where people told us, you know, it's not that we're opposed to attached housing or multifamily or duplex housing. What really matters to us is it looks like it belongs here in Stonington. It looks like the type of housing that we have here in Stonington. And that's what's most critical. And that came through in our visual preference survey. It really came through in the discussions we had following our presentation. And so that's really where the idea for this approach got started. So with that being said, I'm happy to open it up to any comments or questions we have. And we do recommend this approach for a couple of other types of development. And so I'll move on to those next. And we have a hand raised.
Carolyn?
Hi, this is actually Mark Farrar. Carolyn and I are watching on the same computer. With regard to adding additional housing, to me, it's, you know, the visual aspect is important, but what is the plan for the percentages of types of housing that we're adding? So, for example, if the town currently is comprised of, let's say, 20% low-income housing, are we going to be adding that type of housing at the same percentage? you know, lots of people move to this town because of the demographic of the town.
Sure, sure.
So anyway, could you just?
Yeah, oh, it's a great question. So what we're talking about is all market rate. I mean, it could be built as affordable. It's all market rate though. We have not proposed any strictly affordable housing criteria or minimums. When you talk about affordability, you know, there are different measures of what's considered affordable housing or lower income housing. The state has one measure as is measured by Connecticut Statute 830G, and which I think many of you are familiar with. It basically sets a 10% objective for communities to achieve 10% affordable housing. And if you don't achieve that 10%, then developers can bypass your zoning regulations and build affordable housing. They just appeal to Superior Court to do so. Stonington does not have a 10% supply of affordable housing as defined by the state. So developers can currently basically go to the courts to bypass your zoning regulations to build affordable housing wherever the infrastructure will permit. This is intended, we're intending here to address really to increase the diversity of housing type, to admittedly have some forms of housing that are more affordable. I think it's intuitive that attached housing or duplex housing would be more affordable to either for purchase or for rent than a single family home. So that's definitely part of this, is to provide a greater range of housing type to be more affordable. But this would still all be market rate. So I think, you know, the primary audience that we're trying to connect with here are people that already live in town, or seniors that would like to downsize because their house has a lot of upkeep and their taxes and insurance is a lot, to young families that grew up here and would love to move back or be able to get started in Stonington. So when we entertain ideas about allowing for a greater range of housing type, I think the concern about, is it consistent with the character of Stonington, is incredibly important, because you have a very special community, and which is why we're taking this approach that it has to be a pre-approved housing type. And I think if it looks like it belongs in Stonington, looks like what you see in different areas of Stonington, I think that's what's more important, and maybe less important is that it has two different entrances. I know, I realize, you know, that's a matter of opinion, I suppose, but our approach here isn't really to upset the composition of Stonington. It really just to provide small opportunities. And these are fairly small opportunities. You don't have that many open space subdivisions that were built under the existing regs. And there are not that many properties that have everything you need to make them a good candidate for an open space subdivision, whether or not it's single family, attached, or duplex. We see this as just opening a crack, for a small opportunity to provide a little more diversity in the housing supply.
Sure. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that response, and so I understand where you're coming from, and
with Clifton on that, we can figure out a way to get that shared or
That would just
posted.
be helpful to just a little more awareness.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Francisco, I'll look into developing a map on it for sharing at a future meeting. Just to clarify though, this wouldn't apply to those already approved OSDs, correct?
So this is intended really for new developments. So I think taking a look at
Correct.
what
I just
we currently
wanted to
have.
clarify for Jen.
Yeah, it would apply only to new developments. And for the most part, what you already have has been built out to the fullest extent. I mean, they maximize those properties to squeeze homes in. So there aren't opportunities for infill development in existing. And I think when this moves forward, if this were to move forward into the zoning regulation, we'd have a lot of language to specify exactly that. So just so everyone understands this, when we talk about open space development, we're not talking about a district, a unique zoning district in town. We're talking about a development type, a subdivision type that is allowed in many districts. So you have both existing open space developments, and you have the potential for new ones. If they meet you have to assemble a certain amount of acres, and you have to meet some other conditions. So what we're talking about is really about future potential of new developments that could occur in town. We're currently allowed. We're not changing anything about where they would be allowed. We're sticking with what is currently allowed. All right, any other questions on this issue? And I've got a couple of following slides that take the same approach with the use of pre-approved housing. So we'll be able to talk about this some more if you'd like. So let me move on. So recommendation 23 would be to reduce the lot size requirement for duplexes and triplexes, or three families. Currently, your zoning regulations require a duplex to have twice the single family lot size and a three-family home to have 3 times the single family lot size. And that on its face, that's intuitive, right? If it's 3 dwellings, you need 3 times as much area. But in practice, one building has a much less significant impact on a property and really requires much less space than a single family home does. And so therefore there are some efficiencies, and you can really accommodate one building, one structure on a very similar footprint as you can a single family home, particularly if it's properly designed. So what we are recommending is to provide an incentive, or an option, I should say, to build a pre-approved housing type on a lot size that is the same as a single family lot size. Now, all the setbacks would still be in place to ensure the lot coverage standards would all apply, so the lot couldn't be built out too much, the FAR, et cetera. So there are a lot of controls on how big this can be, how much of the property it could consume. But we would reduce that to a single family lot size. And the purpose here is to allow for or to encourage or enable this type of development, to allow for or to support a diversity of housing type in the town. Now, where duplexes and triplexes are currently allowed, they're currently permitted in the RR80, the RA40, RM20, RM15, RH10, and then in a bunch of your commercial districts as well. So once again, the stipulation is they would have to be a pre-approved housing type to build on a single family lot size. Any comments or questions on this item? Blunt, go. You have your hand raised.
It's Blunt White, 77 Collins Road. So have you thought about how many additional units the town would see? Housing units, how many new housing units would be built with this, this coupled with the reducing reducing it, the 80 to or 80 to our 40. It sounds like a lot of units could be created, especially if they were the housing type.
I think that's true. I think a lot could. I don't know if a lot will be. And so to assess what number we could expect, I think would be difficult to do. I think you can make a basic assumption that if you reduce the lot size, you definitely will get more of this type of development, because now you will have vacant parcels that could accommodate a single family house before, haven't been built on for whatever reason. And now there's extra incentive to build on them because it can accommodate more units. And and that's part of the intention of this, is to allow for the development of more housing in town, because it simply is not enough housing to accommodate the demand. And we're not keeping up across Connecticut, and that's true in Stonington as well. So that's very much the intention. With respect to how many units, it's hard to say. Can we expect anyone's going to tear down a single family house to put up a duplex or a triplex? I think that's really unlikely, unless you're talking about a dilapidated property. So I don't think we're talking about conversions of single family homes. I think we're talking about vacant lots.
Well, can you hear me still?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking this has an impact on the number of kids in schools, on the police commission, where we were talking about traffic lights.
Yeah.
I think you need to know how many more units, or at least a range, an educated guess, something.
Yeah, I understand. With respect to schools, your school enrollment has been steady, if not falling.
No, it's falling.
So-
It's
Yes,
declining. It's
right.
declining.
Yeah, exactly. So that's always a concern, right? That's always a concern.
What
However,
I'm just saying is, there's a lot of people with.
Yeah, you're cut off blunt, but I think you raise a very important point or concern, is what is the potential impact on our ability to provide services to our residents?
Exactly. And
I think
other boards and commissions might like to know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and they will, and that's the purpose of this process. That's why we're not at a public hearing right now trying to introduce this. We're inviting people to review this and provide us comments. In terms of the amount of analysis that we can conduct, admittedly, it is limited. Some of this analysis might require thousands of dollars worth of work to really get accurate or precise numbers. I think we can describe the anticipated impacts at the very least, and then invite analysis. And I would agree that analysis would be, it would certainly be informative to this process.
Good, because I think people would look at tearing down their house and creating especially if it's an older home, if they could, if there was only one house on the lot and they could put 3 on that lot, that would certainly be a strong incentive to doing it.
Okay, understood. We do have a couple other hands raised.
Kit?
Just a quick question. You listed all of the zones that allow duplexes or triplexes.
Yes.
I could be wrong, but I think there are some duplexes, lots being sold as duplexes in an RA20.
Yeah, the RA20 isn't zoned to allow for duplexes. It's strictly single family. Both the RA20, RA15 are some of your strictest with respect to uses allowed. They're similar to the GBR 130 and RC 20. They're very restrictive, so that.
Well, it's Mason's Island, so it's either a 20 or.
Mason's Island has a few different zoning districts.
Right.
It's carved up. Some of it's RC 120.
So that list isn't exhaustive of.
But this is exhaustive. These are all of the districts where, and the only districts where duplex and triplex are permitted. It is only these districts that you see on the screen.
But you just said that you thought in Mason's Island there were some areas that.
Well, no, I said that Mason's Island has several different, or maybe not several, it has 3 or 4 different zoning districts, right? It isn't, so it could be that one of those districts, right? It could be that those lots are in one of the districts.
She's eating your food.
Listed here.
She's eating your food. Sorry.
That's all right.
So sorry, my dog is eating the dinner. So then this goes back to the combination of RA 15 and RA 20.
Yes, yes.
So would the combination allow for?
So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. And that's one of the reasons why we've been very intentional in the work we're doing to only recommend combining districts that allow for the same uses.
Okay.
And so the RA 20 and RA 15, neither one of those allows duplexes or triplexes. They only allow single family and some accessory uses, that sort of thing. So merging those districts doesn't change any of the uses allowed. And so we're very intentional about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right.
Francis
Do we have? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I'll move on unless our attendee can unmute and speak up. I'm going to move on. And we can come back if you're, oh, go ahead. We've got you now.
Yeah, I'm very
Yeah.
quickly. Are you suggesting that there will be only one specific design that people that
No.
abstract?
Great question. So I showed you like one or two examples.
Yeah, okay.
The idea would be to have a catalog of choices. Now, and I'm glad you asked this question because it really asks about, all right, what does this look like? How does it work? And how do we get there?
Yeah.
So as part of our zoning regulations rewrite, we will not be developing that catalog of choices. So this recommendation, before it is implemented, before it would be adopted, if we do move it forward, it is going to have to wait for another process. And that process would involve hiring an architect or working with a design firm that provides these types of design guidelines and templates and building drawings to most likely assemble a committee, and it could be led by your architectural and site design review board or a task force that's assembled to basically select. And that process could engage the community in that selection to basically select the prototypes or style designs with the idea being you would have lots of choices.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for the question.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to move on. So recommendation 24 is to revise the attached housing standards to be less restrictive. So attached housing, we're talking about townhouses. There might be commonly referred to as condos, although condos is the ownership type. You currently allow attached housing in the RM20, RM15, RH10, and PV5, which is not a residential district, more of a mixed-use village district. They're allowed in those districts. In the PV5, it's the standards are fairly permissive, right? It's a very low bar to build this type of housing. In your residential districts, it is an incredibly high bar. You have to assemble, I think it's 15 acres, massive requirements. The result of which is that between few and zero of these have been built in those districts. And once again, our aim is to encourage or support the development of a diversity of housing types to meet the needs of more residents, whether young or older or in between, based upon their preference and their ability to afford housing. So what we're recommending is to reduce the minimum lot size requirement from 10, I said 15, it's 10 acres to be proportional with the requirement for the district. So right now, the 10-acre requirement is basically 40 times the minimum lot size of the RH10 district, which is incredibly disproportional for a particular type of housing, that it has to have 40 times the lot size of a single family home. So what we recommend, instead of a 10-acre requirement of tying the minimum lot size to the minimum lot size of the district. So make it proportional. So by example, in the RM20, make it 4.6 acres, 3.4 in the RH10, and 2.3 acres in the RH10. And so that makes it proportional to the required lot sizes of those districts. And it ties it directly to that instead of a flat lot size acreage requirement. And 2.3 acres in the RH10, if my math is right here, is still about roughly 9 to 10 times the size of the minimum lot size. So you still have to assemble a pretty good chunk of land to be able to do one of these projects. So they're not going to be shoehorned in between single family homes. The next part of this would be provide an option that would double the maximum units per acre. So right now, attached housing, much like duplex and triplex, is limited to the same density as the equivalent of single family homes that you would build on that property. At which point is, well, what's the whole point of doing attached housing if I can't get more on the property anyway? So here we would tie this once again to a pre-approved housing type. So we would allow the density of housing to be doubled if a pre-approved housing type is selected. So it maintains a measure of control over what is built. And we're not talking about 10 times the density or even 5 times, just double the density, but not unlike what we're talking about allowing for two-family. And the next are just some basic housekeeping on the regulations. They are just excessively complex. And so we've recommended cleaning up and restructuring the open space requirements to better distinguish private space from public and active from passive open space. To marginally increase the number of dwelling units allowed in each building. Right now it's limited to 4, and 5 is a very common model for attached townhouses. You see as many as 10 or more often. So we recommend just a marginal increase to provide an extra benefit to building it in the first place. And that would apply to the RM20, 15, RH10 districts, and then PV5, there's not a limit. And then to reduce the required buffer to 10 feet. And so here we're not talking about setbacks. Setbacks would be the same as the districts. There's a separate buffer or screening requirement that requires, planting of trees or fence or wall or berm. Presumably there's a fear for these being some sort of nuisance. I'm really not sure that's the case. But regardless, we're not talking about abandoning the buffer. The current buffer, I think it requires it to be close to the entire setback. And you don't need more than 10 feet to plant evergreen trees and fit in a fence or wall and lots of other landscaping. So that just brings it down to a more reasonable standard. All right, I think that was the extent of our recommendations on this item. Let me confirm I don't have anything else. Yep, that's it. So that being said, any questions or comments on this? So once again, only allowing in the districts we're currently allowed, only allowing an increase in density if a pre-approved housing type, reducing the minimum lot size from 10 acres down to a more proportional lot size, but still multiples, like close to 10 times of the requirement of those districts. And that's that's the big idea. Blunt, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you really need to put some dimensions around these numbers, the numbers of additional units. We've got the triplexes, and now we have a lot more attached housing, and that's really going to have an impact in town. You got to give us the number of units that you're going to could be created, at least a range.
I think, as you might expect, my response is going to be exactly the same as the prior. It's an important issue that you raise. We can't possibly say how many units. I can tell you, but addressing your concern, and I think your concern is very real, so I don't want to be dismissive of it. The RM20, RM15, RH10 districts are largely built out. We're talking about districts that are 90% plus built out. So there are few opportunities where you can assemble anywhere from 2.3 to 4.6 acres for this type of development without having to acquire properties and tear down houses. So if this regulation were to go into effect, I think it could be a couple years before you see anything happen, and would likely be a project here and there. And I have no way of knowing that for certain, but based upon the fact that this regulation has been around in some form for a long time with very little development activity, it tells me that the types of changes we're proposing, given the areas that it's limited to and the available land in those areas, is really not going to see a huge amount of development, very little. And then so the bigger question is, so why are we bothering? And this is much like some of the other topics we talked about. Why are we bothering? Well, the reason why we're looking at all of these possibilities and potential is that Connecticut, Stonington, the coast has a real housing affordability problem. I mean, you have children and who are now adults that grew up in Stonington that cannot afford to live in Stonington, and that is not a healthy thing for any community. And so that's why we're looking at all these opportunities, and opportunities that we feel would be minimally disruptive to the community and may actually be beneficial. All right, we have additional hands raised. Let's go to someone else.
And you're saying that, you're saying that we need to have the additional, we need to have these rules for more people, but then you're saying, well, we really can't get that many more people in. But then you're saying, but we need to have all these, it just seems like, I just don't know where this is going. I do know that there are much more affordable areas that are not far from here. You've got North Stonington, you've got Groton, you've got New London. Not everyone can live in Stonington. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Not everyone can live in Greenwich. Not everyone can live in Westport. Not everyone can live in Madison. There are towns that not everyone can live in, and that's the world we live in. And the presumption that growth is good, or the presumption that density is good, the presumption that we need more housing, I don't agree with that presumption. And I don't see why we take that as a given. And I do think there are other solutions that doesn't have to be so inward looking to Stonington. And I do think this density issue, we talked about the character of certain streets earlier. This density issue, I mean, you're going to change the whole nature of the town over time. You're right, it won't happen in a year or two and you'll be long gone, but we'll still be here and we'll be seeing it, densify into a Hartford or whatever. And that's not what we want. That's not what we bought into when we moved to Stonington.
All right, thank you, Stuart. I understand your concern, and I'm just going to disagree that that anything we're doing is going to fundamentally change the character or quality of the town. And I realize that's a matter of perspective or opinion. And as a resident, that I understand that's a concern for you, right? As you point out, I'm not a Stonington resident. But I was, and my team was hired by the town let me finish.
Okay.
My team, we were hired by the town to assist the town in guiding them in this direction. So I bring that expertise, and you bring your perspective, and we all hear it. So while I might disagree with you on some aspects, we are hearing you. We understand your perspective, and it is legitimate. It is clearly legitimate.
I just feel like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. I mean, on the one hand, you're saying it's not going to be.
No, sir, I'm not. No, sir, I'm not. Let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next question or comment if we have one.
David Lee.
Hi, sorry, it took me a while. This is Randy Lee. As an owner of apartment complexes, not in this town, what I'm seeing here for amount of spaces and everything, I think you're underestimating the amount of space needed for apartment complexes or attached housing. Because you need more parking than ever before. When we first built our places a long time ago,
Yeah.
A lot of families just had one car.
Yeah. Right.
Now you're lucky if you can get them down to 3 for one apartment. So
right.
minimizing the amount of lot size needed really, I think, is shortchanging us and causing a problem of cars on the streets, this kind of thing. And then also, you need space. You need space for these kids to play away from the roads. The same thing that we had the problem over on Route 2 with that housing development that was so dense that there was no place for people to live, or park or anything else. So
right.
The future, and how people actually live, not just trying to cram things in. That's all I'm saying, and that's from a professional.
Okay. Yeah, let me try to respond to that. And I understand that concern. You know, when we talk about a 2.3 acre site, you know, that's a decent amount of land in a district such as the RH10. You know, that's a big, so we're not necessarily cramming things in. With respect to where you started with parking, so there are a lot of controls over how much of the site can be built on, that are currently in place and will remain in place. And we've actually proposed more controls on that in our earlier recommendations that we didn't cover this evening in terms of lot coverage. So there are a lot of controls, and that really makes it more of a challenge for the developer to meet the parking program. And a developer simply isn't going to build units for which they can't park because they can't sell them or rent them, whatever it may be. Given the densities we're talking about, this can work. And with respect to open space and concern for not enough open space for residents, there's actually a very stringent open space requirement. And we're maintaining that. We're restructuring it to make it legible, because right now, you know, even my team had trouble making sense of it, and that's not a good regulation. So we're talking about restructuring it only to ensure that it does, this type of development would require both private open space that's private to each unit and common open space, as well as adequate landscaping and passive and active open space. So I think, yes, there's a lot that needs to happen on one site, but we're still very limited in density. We're not talking about tripling, quadrupling, or 10 times the density of what's allowed in the districts. We're only talking about going up to double. And that can definitely be accommodated on a 2.3 to 4.6 or more acre site. And remember, that's the minimum. That's not the limit. That's what you can start with. I hope I addressed your concerns.
Kind of. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let's move forward. And this is the last one of this nature, and it's just following the same theme. It's you allow congregate living facilities, and these can be a range of facility types for seniors and those that need care, assisted living care. So it could take very different forms. It could be in the form of you know, large a building with residents that live in rooms to you know, to attached housing with individual units. Currently, congregate living facilities are allowed in a range of districts, and they're all listed right there. Not unlike attached housing, it's very similar list of districts were allowed, or excuse me, not attached housing, but duplexes and triplexes. And so much like the attached housing conversation we just had, what we are recommending is to modify the standards for that housing. And if you excuse me, I'm just going to turn on another light here. Balance things out a little bit. Sorry about that. So first, to build congregate care facility, and these facilities can take the form as few as half a dozen units. So they can be really small as described in your regulations. However, you currently require 15 acres for something that could be a very small number of units. So we recommend changing that to 5 acres, which would match what you require for convalescent homes. And because the definition and the range of facilities for a congregate care facility may include something that looks very much like a convalescent home, it would make sense to apply a comparable standard at 5 acres instead of 15. The yard requirements are incredibly excessive, over 100-foot plus setbacks required. We recommend reducing that to twice the yard requirement of the district in which they're located. So doubling the requirement, that would make it more commensurate with what is found in the district. We recommend updating the buffer and screening requirement regulations because they're duplicative, redundant, extremely excessive. So we want to bring those in line with the adjustments that we're proposing for setbacks. The screening, for whatever reason, you require screening in the front yard, and as well as, the side and rear yards make sense, but to have to screen the front of a building, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. This isn't an industrial use. This isn't an unsightly nuisance use. We're not talking about a bus yard depot. We're talking about a building or homes for that matter. So that's the extent of our recommendations. In addition to that, there is a required minimum living unit space that's in the regs. We need to take that out because Public Act 2129 and statute now prohibits us from setting minimums. It has to be controlled only by building code. So that has to come out. So that being said, that's the extent of our recommendations. Once again, like every community in Connecticut, you have an aging population that is in need of this type of housing and this type of living assistance that are afforded by these facilities. And that is exactly what we're responding to. Blunt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think the 5 acres is too small. It's, I particularly point you to the along North Main Street. There's a parcel there that's there are multiple parcels that are over 5 acres on North Main Street that south of Route 1 and coming into Stonington Borough, into the heart of what everybody holds dear. And if there were to be a Masonic care or
do you happen to know what district those are located in?
There are 80 right now. You would propose to take them to RR 40, and so that's how I saw it. And I don't think that's south of Route 1. These big complexes up by 95. That's a better place for them.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm hearing from you that you don't feel that this type of development is appropriate in an area such as that. Is that correct?
Certainly, yeah. South of Route 1, it would be a gross generalization, but I think a pretty safe one. And
let me ask you this: if there were a 15-acre parcel available in that area, and you had something extremely large developed on a 15-acre parcel, which is currently allowed, would that be more palatable?
Well, you'd certainly you'd be able to build out a campus and with buffers, and it would certainly probably be a lot. It might work, but maybe you should be telling us that we shouldn't be allowed to do them south of Route 1, or help us preserve what's near and dear to us right now. And
all right, so your concern is south of Route 1, is that correct?
Well, that comes top of mind, but as I
Okay,
said, it's
all
a
right.
gross generalization. I
Yep.
think this needs a
Okay.
lot of careful thought. These things have a huge impact. There's they're big and they have the potential to be ugly and so that
Yeah.
to be very careful.
Okay. All right. Thank you for those comments. Anyone else on this topic? All right, let's move on. All right, this one, I think I'm going to have everyone's support on this one. All right, as the regulations are currently written, and I think this will really be, will get your attention. As the regulations are currently written, you cannot keep domestic animals on your property if your lot does not meet the minimum lot size. And which I suppose is an argument for making all the other changes we've talked about, but that's not why we proposed all those other changes. What we're proposing is to fix this. So let me show you exactly what it is I'm talking about. The current, and we're talking about this because domestic animals are treated as an accessory use in residential zoning districts. They're actually listed, and there's some rules around the domestic animals, and they're all right there on the screen. But the way it reads is that dogs, cats, fowl, and others compatible with cohabitation with humans may be kept on the minimum lot areas, which means they may not be kept if you don't have the minimum lot area. So we're going to fix that. We're going to get rid of that language. All right. Are there any questions on this? All right. We have hands raised. Stuart, I want to move on to someone else. All right, Stuart, feel free to submit your comments in a Q&A. I don't care to get into a back and forth about me speaking out of both sides of my mouth this evening. All right, very good. Recommendation 27. Now this is substantial, and this I want to make sure we have enough time to discuss. Is to extend the look-back period of the substantial improvement definition. So here we are talking about your flood hazard regulations, which you have a flood hazard zone, you're a coastal community, so it covers significant areas along the shore and along your rivers. And it's intended to require a very high standard of construction in those areas to really minimize damage, loss of life resulting from severe storms and flooding events. Now, the look back period, and it's going to take me a little while to explain this, but I want to make sure everyone's clear as to what we're talking about. You have something called substantial improvements, and it's defined, and I've got the definition on the next page. And what this part of the regulation is all about is that if you substantially improve your property, your home, to a certain degree, then whatever improvements, additional improvements you would like to make, need to bring the structure into full compliance with the flood hazard regulations and the building code regulations for flood hazard areas, which may include elevating a structure. In the case of residential structures, that is the biggest implication, and there are some other implications as well, but that's the big one. Now, how that substantial improvement is defined is the real question. There is something called a look-back period, meaning the substantial improvement is defined as a period going back, in the case of the existing regulations, 1 year. So if you've provided improvements to the property over the course of a year, that would be more than 50% of the structure of the property, then you need to bring that property into full compliance with the flood hazard building regulations. If you're 49%, then you can make the improvements without making any improvements that are required by the flood hazard regulations, or they're required to bring them into the property into full compliance. So the look back period is very important, because the further you look back, the more the greater range of improvements you might be capturing on a property. Capturing, maybe you did a kitchen one year and a bathroom the next, or you had a garage one year, you did the roof the next, whatever it may be. If you look back far enough, eventually, very easily, any future improvement would cross the threshold into requiring that property to be fully compliant, which, and the biggest implication here is being raised. Now, we're not talking about maintenance. We're not talking about re-roofing or painting or replacing siding. We're talking about additions, substantial improvements, building a new accessory structure, if it adds value that eventually crosses the threshold. Now, as I mentioned, the current look back period is 1 year. And as you might imagine, if you are smart enough in planning out your improvements, you could very easily triple the value of your property over the course of several years without ever having to bring it into compliance with the building code regulations for flood hazard areas. And so that's the loophole. Now, that 1 year has not always been in place. And what we're recommending, our recommendation is to change it to a 3-year. The town has had a longer period in the past that was in place for a few years, and it was reverted back to a 1 year. So the only change we're talking about is really 1 or 2 words here, is changing 1 to 3. So in terms of the text amendment we're talking about is incredibly simple, but the implications are substantial. This would be, as we understand it, this would affect every property in a flood hazard area and would require more of those properties to improve their properties to bring them up to date or into compliance with building code for flood hazard areas. The purpose of this recommendation is to really reduce the devastation that could be caused in a storm by getting these many future properties out of harm's way, and ensuring that there aren't substantial investments in properties that will, in the near future, could be destroyed by a storm or flood event. So that's the change that's proposed. In terms of the context here, there are some exclusions, as I mentioned, to what constitutes a substantial improvement, and that excludes anything that's required to bring a property up to standard for health, safety, or sanitary reasons. And historic structures are also excluded from this. Now, how do other communities treat this? As I mentioned, there's a range. In the past, it had been 5 years in Stonington. Town of Groton is only 1 year, and same for City of Groton. New London, 10 years. Waterford had their regulations was for the life of the structure, which basically means looking back into the documented records of building permits that have been pulled and the value of improvements made. You look back the life of the structure for what was on file. They recently changed it to 2 years. East Lyme is 2 years. We had a lot of back and forth as to, well, first of all, whether or not to change this. There was agreement on the commission that this should be increased. There was agreement that the 5 years was probably too aggressive, which is why it was changed back to 1. And we landed on 3 as what we wanted to carry forward. So with that being said, I'm happy to open up to any questions or comments on this.
Jen McFadden.
Hi, thank you. Hi again, thank you. So Lord's Point was very much a part of the discussion back in the day when we went from 5 to 1 years, 1 year. I sort of look at this as looking for a solution when there's not a problem. I'm curious. I have a couple of questions. So I'm curious. I get that the storm surge and climate change, and I believe all that. On the other hand, we are also talking repeatedly about people who have lived here for generations who can't afford to live here. It's the same situation. Some of the families who have lived in these areas for generation who simply can't afford to suddenly, because they want to do some moderate improvements on their homes. And I think it's important to make clear that this is not the total value of your full property. It's the structure only. So that's a very much reduced amount, especially when you're talking about, areas that are on the water, right? You're only talking about the structure.
Right.
So I have concerns about that pushing people who've been here for a long time out of these neighborhoods. I have concerns that this could lead to unintended consequences of people not doing improvements and frankly blight and other issues. And put on top of that, if anyone's tried to do a project in the last several years, it's impossible to get a contractor and get all that lined up. So putting another burden on that not only puts a burden on the homeowner who wants to make the improvement, but also on the abutting neighbors who have to live through other people's renovations, especially when you're in a dense area like where we are in Lord's Point. It's a problem. And so I respectfully think we don't need to change something that isn't broken. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, John. Does anyone else?
Anne Kavula?
Hi, I am also a Lord's Point resident, and I have been going through a renovation that has been dragging on for years.
Okay.
Been dragging on because of this exact issue. I can only do 50% of the permitted work and the value of the home. So, we've been doing that, and I would definitely say it's a burden on the neighbors because it's just ongoing, and that's a whole separate issue. However, you said in your statement that the value of the home would raise with these renovations and that we may be able to survive this change and look back because each year the idea is that the amount we'd be able to spend would raise because the value of our home has raised.
No, I know I did not say that. I did not say that.
Well, you said something about the value of the home. So I just want, my question is the town going to value our homes appropriately? I've had 2 private adjusters come and evaluate my home, and the town won't accept the assessment, even though my house is clearly worth more than, and this is the house land.
Right.
I am against this. I think a lot of homes are going to go into more disrepair. I love my home. It's 100 years old. I understand what you're saying about FEMA, and we're doing everything to bring our house into a great condition. But this is going to cause, I think, you're either going to get people doing things on off code illegally, trying to save their homes, or you're going to lose the character of this neighborhood and have tear downs. And, so I'm team keep it 1 year. And I'm happy to speak to the town about our experience because what should have been a 2-year renovation is now going on like, I don't know, year 4, going into year 5. And they will not increase the value of our home, which I think is crazy.
Okay. All right. I appreciate your comments. I understand it's a very frustrating experience for you. I think it would be helpful because this is the first I'm hearing about there being an issue with, the appraised value not being accepted. I think it'd be helpful if you could put your thoughts into writing, your experience, and share that with Clifton so we could better understand the issues surrounding that. And thank you for the comments. Anyone else?
Blunt White?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that about 20% of the properties in Stonington are in flood zones. That's like 1,300
Yeah.
properties.
Yeah.
And there needs to be more outreach to all those people. There's lots of scenarios because of, the various costs of the projects and the various values of the properties. And I think you need to get input from a lot more people than, you had your meeting where you talked about coastal resilience and there were 75 people in the room. Well, there's 1,300 people in flood zones in Stonington. And I'm sure they'd like to tell you what this, how this would impact them if you changed it from 1 year to 3 years. And
Sure.
I think they'd also tell you that 1 year isn't a loophole. It's just the minimum that's established by FEMA. FEMA says it can be
Correct.
one, and
Yeah.
so it's not a loophole. It's just the minimum that FEMA will allow.
That is absolutely correct. You're right. It is the FEMA minimum. And although FEMA clearly does allow communities to set a higher standard or longer period. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Okay, we don't have anyone else, so I'll move on. So that concludes our recommended amendments. So where do we go from here, right? And as I mentioned, we're very early in this process. So I very much appreciate all the feedback I received this evening, and we are documenting all of it. I will discuss all of this with the commission, and we will make adjustments as necessary in response to what we heard this evening. We will then set aside these recommendations. We will likely modify the recommendations that are currently online, so you'll see a newer version of those in response to any changes we make coming out of this meeting. And those will be there. And they'll be there. Please do encourage your neighbors, friends, family in Stonington to review those. We really do want to invite participation. We want people to know about this, and we welcome feedback. So we will otherwise table those recommendations and move on to a very similar process for your commercial and industrial zoning districts. And starting that process as soon as next month and carrying on into the fall. We will conduct a workshop likely in September. We haven't scheduled it yet in support of that work. And then, of course, where this is all going, we talked about it before, would be as soon as middle of 2025. And potentially continuing on into the next year, if that's the time it takes, we will begin bringing these recommendations to public hearings for consideration of adoption. And we're not going to do this all at once. It'll be in phases to afford adequate participation and adequate opportunity to provide comment to the commission as it considers adopting these recommendations. All right, so with that being said, that concludes my presentation this evening. If you do have any further questions, comments, if you'd like to submit comments in writing, please direct those to Clifton Eiler. There's his email address. You can also find it on the town's website. As I mentioned earlier, Clifton is really great about receiving feedback, and he's been very responsive. He forwards everything to us. So it does what you have to say does find its way to the team, and it is discussed with the commission. So before we close out, I did see one hand raised. Are there any final comments or questions?
Go ahead, Christopher Johnson.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. First of all,
Sure.
You mentioned not looking at creating a smaller zone than the RH10.
Right.
To bring properties in compliance there. Can you speak to why that wasn't considered?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I know while to many, some of the changes we're proposing appear to be really, ambitious in many ways. At the same time, we've been very careful to work within the framework of your existing zoning regulations and your existing districts, and not to carve the town into even smaller pieces. But what I'm hearing this evening and a couple of comments and the points that were made about areas where that would still be largely non-conforming, even if rezoned to RH10, cause us to think about, well, should we consider creating another district to account for those small properties, and whether that's a 5,000 or 7,500 square foot lot size district, I don't know.
Okay, and my
But
second
we will
question,
discuss it. We will discuss it.
thank you. I noticed on your map when you were looking at rezoning some of those residential
Yeah.
areas, that Mystic was notably absent. Is that because we're not looking at, trying to rezone into conformance in that area?
That area had a much higher degree of conformity, and first of all, much of it's RH10 as it is. And so those lots are to a much higher degree in conformity. And don't get me wrong, there are still non-conforming lots kind of peppered throughout, but we really didn't have solid clusters of sizable areas where it really made sense to take them down to something else. And so that's why you didn't see any proposed changes all the way in Mystic.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, are there any other? Nicole, is there anyone else we haven't called upon yet?
Nope, we don't have any other hands right now.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and for staying with us. We really appreciate your patience with all of this, and you all were incredibly, I think all your comments and questions were incredibly productive and very helpful. And so, I thank you for being able to engage in a discussion about this. I realize some of this can be very upsetting. So I appreciate everyone for being patient and communicating your thoughts. And I think trusting that we're trying to do, we want to do what's best for the community. So thank you all. This concludes my part of the presentation. Chuck, is there anything you'd like to say to close the meeting? And Chuck, if you're, I don't know if you've successfully unmuted, I know you're having an issue.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was unmuted. Express our sincere and earnest thanks to everybody, the commission members and members of the public for their comments. Very helpful feedback tonight, and it will be taken into consideration. We're far from decisions on these subjects. It's still very much a discussion. So we thank them all for their comments and assure them that they will be taken into consideration as we move forward.
All right. Thank you, Chuck. That concludes our meeting this evening. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.